Welcome back, everyone. Okay, let's dive into this. Today, we're looking at something that represents the absolute pinnacle of scientific ambition and, honestly, extreme danger, sending humans into space. Launching a satellite into orbit is undeniably hard, but launching a living, breathing human being into the harsh vacuum of space, keeping them alive and then bringing them safely back down to Earth, that is exponentially harder. It requires a total paradigm shift in engineering. So today we're unpacking ISRO's most ambitious, most complex, and unequivocally most dangerous project to date. We're talking about the Gaganyaan mission.
At its core, Gaganyaan is India's maiden human spaceflight program. The objective might seem kind of straightforward on paper, but it is staggeringly difficult in practice. The goal is to launch a crew of astronauts into a low Earth orbit, specifically an altitude of 400 kilometers, for a 3-day mission. And after those 3 days are up, the mission has to safely return them by pulling off a splashdown landing right in Indian seawaters. What's really fascinating here is the sheer scale of the challenge. We aren't just dealing with physics and propulsion anymore. We're dealing with biology, life support, and extreme re-entry temperatures.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll cover the mission brief and timeline. Then, the strategic impact on India. Third, we'll look at navigating safety challenges. And finally, the future outlook and recap.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the mission brief and timeline.
To truly wrap our heads around Gaganyaan, we have to know exactly who's involved. A mission of this magnitude requires a massive coordinated effort. It's not just one agency working in a silo. The Indian Space Research Organization, or ISRO, is the lead agency orchestrating the whole program. But they have absolutely crucial partners. The Indian Air Force is a central pillar here. In fact, the government recently made headlines by officially revealing the 4 astronaut designates for this mission. These 4 individuals, soon to be known as Gaganauts, are all group captains and test pilots selected directly from the IAF. Plus, the Air Force is providing the recovery helicopters. And finally, we have the Indian Navy, who holds the massive responsibility of actually recovering the capsule and the crew once they splash down into the ocean.
Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds. Historically, only one Indian citizen has ever been to space, and that was Rakesh Sharma way back in 1984. But crucially, he flew on a Soviet rocket. The paradigm shifted dramatically in 2018 when the Prime Minister formally announced that India would send humans to space using an Indian rocket. Now, while the original timeline naturally faced some delays because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the momentum has been absolutely incredible. In 2020, those 4 IAF's astronauts headed to Russia for extensive survival training, and they're currently continuing their prep at the ISRO facility in Bengaluru. In 2023, we saw a massive milestone with the successful TVD-1 test, which we'll get into in just a bit. All of this is aggressively building toward the planned manned launch date in 2025.
Moving right along to Section 2, Strategic Impact on India.
4. If this mission is successful, India will become only the 4th nation in the entirety of human history to independently launch humans into space. Just let the sheer weight of that sink in for a second.
It's a very exclusive list. The makeup of that elite space club is just the USSR, the USA, China, and now, aiming for that highly coveted 4th spot, India. The crucial takeaway here is that achieving independent human spaceflight is the ultimate, undeniable demonstration of a nation's technological prowess on the global stage. Adding a new name to this list, it changes the global aerospace dynamic entirely.
Now, we mentioned earlier that sending humans is exponentially harder than sending satellites, and the real challenge centers exactly here. The hardest part of the Gaganyaan mission isn't actually building the rocket, it's mastering the Environmental Control and Life Support System, or ECLSS. ISRO has to build an entirely indigenous system that performs 3 absolute life-or-death functions: scrubbing carbon dioxide, controlling humidity, and providing a continuous flow of oxygen inside a completely sealed capsule for days on end. This technology is incredibly complex, it's highly classified, and frankly, no foreign nation is willing to sell it to India. So India's had to develop this life-preserving tech entirely from scratch. But here's something absolutely vital to understand. Gaganyaan isn't the final goal. It's literally just step 1. The underlying technology is being developed right now. The life support systems, the docking capabilities, the orbital habitats, these are the absolute prerequisites for India's massive, stated goal of building its own space station, the Bhartiya Antariksha Station, by the year 2035. Gaganyaan is laying the literal foundation for a permanent Indian presence in space.
That brings us to Section 3. Navigating safety challenges.
Past tragedies like the Challenger and Columbia disasters are really sobering reminders that human spaceflight is inherently deadly. In this arena, there is zero margin for error.
For a standard satellite launch, a 95% success rate is generally considered acceptable in the aerospace industry. But when you put a human being on top of thousands of tons of highly explosive fuel, 95% is nowhere near enough. Launching humans requires what's known as a human rating for the rocket, in this case the LVM-3 rocket. That human rating demands a staggering 99.99% safety guarantee, and this brilliantly illustrates the immense pressure ISRO is under.
So how do you even prove a 99.99% safety guarantee? Well, you do it by planning for the absolute worst-case scenario. That is exactly what the TVD-1 in-flight abort test was all about. ISRO deliberately launched a test vehicle and then intentionally triggered a catastrophic failure mid-flight. Sounds crazy, right? But the goal was to prove that, in the event of an exploding rocket, the crew escape system would instantly activate and blast the astronaut capsule up and away from the danger zone. And guess what? The test was a complete success. It provided the critical data needed to verify that the crew would actually survive an anomaly on the launch pad or up in the atmosphere.
Finally, let's wrap things up with Section 4, Future Outlook and Recap.
We know the manned launch is targeted for 2025, but what actually has to happen between now and then? Well, before any human steps foot inside that capsule, ISRO is going to conduct 2 unmanned precursor missions, and sitting inside the orbital module for that first unmanned flight will be Vyommitra. This is a really fascinating half-humanoid robot. ISRO designed this robot specifically to simulate human functions and meticulously test the life support systems in the actual harsh environment of space. They're going to make absolutely sure every single sensor and scrubber works perfectly before risking a single human life.
Beyond just the mission itself, think about the inspirational value here. A successful human spaceflight program is going to catalyze an entire generation of students, pushing them towards STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, and math. Plus, from a purely economic standpoint, building these incredibly complex human-rated components creates a massive, highly advanced domestic supply chain for high-precision aerospace manufacturing right inside the country. It's a huge win-win. All right, let's lock in what we've learned today with a rapid-fire recap. If you're keeping track, these are the high-retention memory triggers you absolutely need. First, Gaganyaan, India's maiden human spaceflight mission. Second, ECLSS, that highly classified environmental control and life support system that scrubs the CO2 and keeps the astronauts breathing. Next, LVM-3, that's the specific human-rated rocket tasked with the launch. Then we have TVD-1, the dramatic in-flight abort test used to guarantee safety. And finally, Vyommitra, the half-humanoid robot leading the unmanned test flights. Got all that?
I want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on. As India successfully indigenizes these highly classified life support technologies literally no one else would sell them, how will the success of Gaganyaan shift the balance of geopolitical power in this new global space race? Because once a nation proves it can put its own people in orbit, the sky is quite literally no longer the limit. Thank you so much for exploring this with me today. Keep asking questions, keep digging into these concepts, and I'll see you in the next explainer.